A Dollar General store manager was shot and killed Tuesday morning. Her friends and family devastated by the loss.
Absolutely one of the worst fears. As someone who worked at that store for a long time, that was always an issue, wondering if when you come to work, if you were going to make it home, and not just from like a gunshot injury, a stab wound. I've had a person come in my store brandishing a machete and locked herself in my break room, and I had to call the cops to get her out. So dollar store workers deal with a lot.
He handed her 2 crumpled dollar bills. While she was smoothing them out on the counter, he shot her in the head. She never even looked up in time to see it coming. 44 years old, a mother, a grandmother, dead on the floor of a Dollar General before she even understood why. If stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe, tap that bell icon. Don't scroll past this one. This is Crime Files, and if you leave now without following, you're going to miss the next case. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens in this one either. Her name was Alexis Hill. Everybody who knew her says the same thing about her, over and over, like they rehearsed it, except they didn't. Kind, generous, dependable. A police officer who met her years ago on a domestic violence call said Alexis was the one who convinced the victim to speak up, to report what was happening to her.
Kind, generous, and dependable.
That's who Alexis was. She wasn't just clocking in and ringing people up. She was the kind of person strangers leaned on. She had 3 sons, 2 grandkids, and she'd been planning to leave Columbus, Georgia behind. She wanted to move to Colorado, be close to her boys, watch her grandchildren grow up in front of her instead of through a phone screen. That was the plan. But life got in the way. She needed major surgery, and that surgery pushed everything back. Her brother Jonathan said something that's been sitting heavy with people since this happened. He said Alexis wasn't supposed to even still be in Columbus. If that surgery hadn't delayed her, she'd have already been gone. She had been 1,000 miles away from that store, from that morning, from all of it. But she wasn't gone yet. She was still there, still working, still being a manager everyone depended on. And on the morning of June 23rd, 2026, she was standing behind the register like she had 1,000 times before. A man walked in. Nothing about him screamed danger. He picked up a pack of hamburger buns. Rang up at $1.58. That's it, $1.58. He handed her 2 crumpled $1 bills, the kind of wrinkled, balled-up cash you'd expect from somebody who'd had those bills sitting in a pocket for a while. Alexis did what any cashier does 100 times a shift. She started smoothing the bills out on the counter. Completely ordinary, completely routine. The kind of moment that happened so fast you don't even remember it a minute later. Except this time, someone was watching that moment happen who would remember it forever because it was caught on the store surveillance camera. And what happened next is the reason Columbus Police Chief Stoney Mathis, a man who's seen plenty in his career, came out afterward and said, and I'm going to say this plainly because he did, we got it on video and it's just cold-blooded murder. As she was straightening that $1.58, the man stepped to the side, and he pulled out a gun. There was no argument, no shouting, no struggle over money, because he wasn't even trying to keep his money. He'd already paid. There was nothing building up to this that anyone in that store could have seen coming. 1 second she's making change. The next, he's raised a weapon and fired, striking her in the head. She was pronounced dead at the scene by the Muskogee County Deputy Coroner at around 10:45 that morning. A woman who spent her whole life taking care of other people, gone in the time it takes to hand someone their change. And then the man who did it turned around, walked out of that Dollar General, and disappeared into Columbus, Georgia, like he hadn't just ended someone's entire world over a pack of hamburger buns. Now here's where it gets even more disturbing. Because when police finally identified their suspect, they learned something that made this whole case even harder to sit with. This man wasn't a stranger to the system. He wasn't someone who'd never crossed paths with law enforcement before. His name was Jerome Marquis Willis, 33 years old, and he had a record that went all the way back to 2007, when he was convicted as a juvenile for robbery right there in Muskogee County. 10 years. He was ordered to serve out of a 20-year sentence. And more recently, in 2023 and 2024, he'd been convicted again, this time for terroristic threats. But here's the detail that's going to make your stomach turn. Jerome Willis had walked out of Dooley State Prison a free man on May 21st, 2026. Do the math with me for a second. Alexis was killed on June 23rd. That means this man had been out of prison for barely a month, just over 30 days, before he walked into that store and pulled a trigger on a woman he had never met in his life. Her family was crystal clear about that point. Her brother Jonathan told reporters flat out that Alexis and Jerome Willis were complete strangers, not exes, not associates, not connected through anyone. He said, and I want you to really hear this. This is just some random stranger that walked into my sister's store and got really violent and confrontational with her and decided that he wanted to escalate things by shooting her and killing her. Random. That's the word that keeps coming up. No motive has ever been released. Not by police, not by the GBI. Nobody has come forward with a reason why this happened. Because as far as anyone can tell, there isn't one. She didn't argue with him. She didn't disrespect him. She was doing her job. Jerome Willis's own mother, a woman named Bernice Hartman, spoke out afterward too, and what she said was almost as unsettling as the crime itself. She said her son had been struggling with mental health issues. She wasn't making excuses. She said that outright. That's no excuse. But she believed it might explain why things spiraled the way they did once police caught up with him. And that spiral was coming fast, because Jerome Willis wasn't going to make it through that day either. While Alexis's body was still being processed at the scene, Columbus police were already moving. They had surveillance footage. They had a description. And they were combing the city, block by block, for the man who did this. It took them almost exactly 3 hours. Around 11:40 that same morning, officers located Willis in a parking lot on Baker Plaza Drive, just a few miles from the Dollar General. They approached him. They gave him verbal commands. The standard procedure: stop, show your hands, get on the ground. And according to police, Willis simply did not comply. Instead of surrendering, he stood there. Officers made the call to send in their K-9 unit, a police dog named Havoc, trained to apprehend him without anyone having to fire a weapon. It was meant to end this without more bloodshed. But Willis had other plans. He pulled his gun again. He shot at Havoc. And then he turned that gun and pointed it directly at the officers standing in front of him. In that instant, they had no choice. They opened fire. Jerome Willis was killed right there in that parking lot, just 3 hours and a few miles away from where he'd taken Alexis Hill's life. An officer was struck during that exchange too, along with K-9 Havoc. Both survived, both with non-life-threatening injuries. But it was close. This could have ended with even more names added to this story. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation stepped in immediately afterward, as they do with every officer involved shooting in the state, to independently review exactly what happened in that parking lot. So think about the timeline here for a second. One morning, one store, one woman doing her job, gone before 11 a.m. And by early afternoon, the man responsible was gone too, shot dead less than 3 hours after he pulled that trigger. 2 lives ended on the same day, over a transaction that came out to $1.58. But the story didn't end in that parking lot. It kept unfolding in Columbus for days afterward. And what happened next says a lot about how a community grieves, and honestly, how corporations respond when tragedy happens under their roof. Dollar General took more than 24 hours to say anything publicly after one of their own store managers was murdered inside one of their stores. 24 hours of silence while the community reeled. When they finally did speak, the company said they were deeply saddened, offered their sympathies, said grief counselors would be available, and confirmed the store was closing indefinitely. It never reopened on any announced timeline. It just sat there, closed, a physical reminder standing on Victory Drive. That silence didn't sit right with people who'd worked retail themselves. A woman named Kenya Slaughter, a former Dollar General assistant manager who left the company back in 2023 and has spent time since then organizing around pay and safety issues at these stores, spoke out. She pointed out something a lot of people don't think about. Dollar General has more locations than McDonald's. Their revenue outpaces Family Dollar and Dollar Tree combined. And yet employees like Alexis are often working alone, behind a register, with minimal protection, in stores on every other corner, as she put it. "Say her name," Slaughter said. "Alexis Hill. Say her name." Even Columbus Police Chief Stoney Mathis, the same man who called this cold-blooded murder, admitted publicly that law enforcement needs to reconsider how they protect retail workers. He said after watching that surveillance video, it was clear patrols needed to be doing more. Check in on clerks working alone, because as he put it, that video made him realize they could be doing more. Meanwhile, Alexis's family was trying to hold itself together. Her brother Jonathan described crying more in those few days than he had in his entire life. On June 28th, family, friends, and strangers who'd never met her but felt for her anyway gathered at the Columbus River Walk. They prayed. They spoke her name out loud. They released balloons into the sky in her memory. People left flowers, cards, stuffed animals outside the store where she died, a growing memorial for a woman who spent her life taking care of everyone else and never got the chance to be taking care of herself. A GoFundMe was set up by Jonathan to help cover funeral costs and support her children and grandchildren left behind. Her funeral was held July 3rd at Cathedral Prayer Kojic, with viewings the day before at 2 different locations, because so many people wanted the chance to say goodbye to her. And that's really what this case leaves us with. Not a mystery. Not an unsolved question about who did this or why. The video is clear. The suspect is identified. The timeline is documented down to the hour. What's left is something harder to answer than any of that. How do you protect someone from a stranger who has no motive at all? Alexis didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't careless. She wasn't rude. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time in any way she could have controlled. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what her job required. And it still wasn't enough to keep her safe. What does it say about how we treat the people who work these jobs? The ones ringing up our hamburger buns and our late-night snacks. When a company can go silent for 24 hours before even acknowledging one of their own employees was murdered on the clock. And what do we owe someone like Jerome Willis, a man clearly struggling, released back into the world after years lockaway, with seemingly no support system catching him before he fell this far? Does the system that let him out share any responsibility for what he did 30 days later? I want to know what you think. Was this truly random? Or is there something deeper here about how we fail people on both sides of that counter before tragedy even happens? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. If this story affected you the way it affected me, do not scroll past this without hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell icon, because Crime Files brings you cases like this every single week. And if you're not subscribed, you're going to miss the next one. Say her name, Alexis Hill. We'll see you in the next video.